May I invite Akshay to introduce himself first? Akshay, where are you?
Hi, my name's Akshay. I've been working in service management for about 22, 23 years now, maybe a bit more. Roman and I were part of the Axelos team that put ITIL-4 together, and you may have seen me on stage at various ITSMF events or webinars or so on and so forth. Currently working for Atlassian as a principal solution engineer in their ITSM solution area. But I'm here today to talk more about service management rather than talking about any sort of tools that or brands that I might be representing there. Roman?
Thank you, Akshay. And we used to work together at Axelos as our very close team, and we continue doing this together. So I'm still with Axelos and PeopleCert, and I have been working as an ITIL architect since joining Axelos back in 2016. And I will do my best not to talk too much about ITIL today. However, I will have to start with another product of good practice, because this idea of a good practice for service management in education is not a new idea. It's not a new problem. The problem is known for years, and more than 20 years ago, there was, in a galaxy far, far away, there was a British Education Communication Technology Agency, which didn't survive various cost optimizations, but before being dissolved, it managed to release an interesting guidance, which was called FITS, which stood for Framework for ICT Technical Support, and has nothing to do with another service management framework called FIT-SM.
Sorry, Roman, can I just stop you there?
Yep.
Could I just ask everyone to stay on mute, please, if you're not speaking? There's a little bit of background noise. I don't want to interrupt Roman's flow, so if you could go on mute, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So there was a free framework about 20 years ago, which was intended to help educational institutions, from schools to colleges to higher education to universities, to help with their emerging technology, with their growing adoption of IT, and it was based on ITIL, or on the second version of ITIL, version 2, and it covered those 10 processes that are more or less known to everyone as support and delivery processes in ITIL version 2, and it was available for free. And if you search persistently enough, you probably will still find those quick references to each of the processes. I'm not going to promote this now in any way, and it's largely outdated, and it was good for the time. And I'm just trying to say that the problem of effective use and effective management of technology in the education it was recognized as long as 20 years ago. And there was a solution, and there should be a better solution for today, because this situation has been changing. The generations has been changing, and the key people who use technology and their literacy in technology, their, let's say, proficiency in technology is changing, and has changed significantly since then. And I believe Akshay will tell us what exactly happened and who are those people.
So as Roman and I were putting this short tech together, we realized that we were falling into perhaps a bit of a trap by thinking very monolithically and about who IT serves in higher education institutions. Now, some higher education institutions also have a research field, so this is why that's the first slide that you see here. But there are other personas that we wanted to split out, and I'll very briefly go through them. And then once we split that out, we can talk about how that helps us understand the diverse needs and map those diverse needs and the solutions that we could be having in service management. So you've got the researchers in some of these institutions. They're often writing code on a research platform to process the data, to either collect data or process the data in some meaningful way. Oftentimes, this data on these research platforms is held in proprietary formats. I remember many, many moons ago working at Pfizer, where they'd just completed the acquisitions of Warner Lambert and Pharmacia, and they had literally tens of thousands uh, of research applications that their scientists had written, trapping data in proprietary formats, which then became from a legal point of view, a discovery and compliance nightmare. So we still see that a lot in research institutions. And of course, the longer those researchers are working on things, the more data accumulates over time, and it has to be subject to regulatory oversight in many cases. And let's be honest, a lot of times the work that these researchers do can be sensitive. It can be from a data privacy or integrity perspective, but it could also be financially significant. A lot of times these educational institutions want to create or incubate some of this research into commercially viable products. So in a subsequent slide, you will see the researcher persona color-coded blue. It'll make sense in time, I promise. But we move on to the next one, which is the instructors. They're often interacting with basic systems such as email, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, or keynotes, or what have you. They're using technology in classrooms, which needs to be simple, reliable. They're using edtech platforms to host courseware, have students submit their homework, collaborate with those students. They may be exchanging sensitive information with their faculty staff, other faculty staff, with students themselves. So then there's perhaps a recognition for some special information security needs, as well as the sort of simple and reliable systems of use, that the instructors want to use. And in a subsequent slide, you will see instructors being represented with orange icons. Then you, of course, have the learners or the students. One of the slides that Roman and I initially had in this deck, which I think ultimately got pulled, is a sort of a timeline view of how, as technology has evolved over time, people who have grown up with certain expectations of technology are misaligned with the current generation of people who are using technology. And what I mean by that is, if I look at my daughters now, they're not in universities yet. The eldest is 12, but she's a digital native. She's grown up with Alexas around the house. She's grown up with knowing about social media, although she doesn't use it. She's grown up with Wi-Fi being ubiquitous. On the other hand, her dinosaur of her father, myself, I came of age in an era where technology was new, interesting. It was replacing paper-based systems. It was more of a productivity tool than it was, as ubiquitous as electricity and water and so on. What I also see in a lot of students and younger generations is identity is strongly associated with consumer technologies. So who you are on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, on Snap, Be Real had its moment in the sun. Those platforms are ways of projecting your identity, of establishing your identity, and this often causes friction between the students and the higher education institution, or indeed with other students. We also see a greater prevalence of, I can't call it shadow IT, but let's call it non-approved systems. So although people might want exchanges between students and instructors to happen over approved platforms, maybe those communications are happening through WhatsApp, for example. And these students are generally used to oversharing in general. as well. I know gross simplifications, and I'm sure if there's anybody under the age of 30 on this call, I'm probably going to be roasted in the chat comments at this point. But let's just move on to the next slide. The
Before
last
we move on to the next slide, I wanted to share our one observation because I have a slightly older teenager here at home. He's 15 and he is preparing to his GCSEs right now and are looking forward to join a college and then proceeding to university. And recently I had a chance to look into his essay that he wrote as part of his English class. And that was a letter to the Secretary of State of Education, who he addressed as Sir, being probably non-aware that this it's a lady these days. And generally, it was a letter where he tried to persuade whoever is in charge of education in this country now that they have been teaching the wrong stuff to the young generation. Have you noticed that it's not 80s around anymore? And I'm also almost quoting right now. Have you noticed that people are working remotely? Have you noticed that people are changing jobs more often than before? Have you noticed that the subjects have been developing since you studied them? That was the general narrative of his letter to the Secretary of State of Education, State Secretary of Education. And I appreciate that generally the task for that essay was to write something persuasive. So he really tried to be a bit pushy in his language, but the message that he came up with himself, he could have chosen any other subject, was not, I believe, only an expression of this teenage rebellious mood, but also a reflection of the perceived gap between what is needed and what is being taught. What is needed and what is the curriculum is focused on. And I believe that this perception of this gap is not only featured in the secondary school, that it continues to higher levels of education. And when we were preparing and discussing this with Akshay, we noticed that this is largely a bifold gap. That on one hand, we have people who are perceived as not prepared for what is required by the modern workspace and by the modern university environment coming from colleges. On the other hand, people who come to universities are skilled better, more in many areas of technology than people who act as their instructors, who people there who work as researchers. And we have one more group here to address. So I'm passing the slide back to Akshay. And this fourth group is the administrators. Students will be green on the following slides.
Yeah. So administrators, just a funny aside, the images that you've seen in preceding slides and this one, they were all generated using DALL-E and GPT-4. And when Roman saw this image, he said, these administrators look younger than the administrators that I've normally encountered. So I said, well, maybe they've dyed their hair or just flattering lighting or makeup or something like that. So that aside, administrators that are working at universities today often, not always, but often came of age when technology was a productivity tool, just like many of us on this webinar. They don't necessarily see as technology as a way of establishing an identity, a way of projecting a persona. They see it as a productivity tool. And because of that, they can often see technology as, quote unquote, the necessary evil. They do work across departments. They may have access to sensitive information such as financial investments and budgets or HR records or complaints, for example. But they're also likely to be using enterprise-grade systems. The larger universities, they might be using Workday or SAP SuccessFactors for their human resources department. They may be using plan view or other sorts of tools for their financial allocations and investment planning. They might be using bespoke systems, but as they scale, as they grow in maturity, they tend to replace those bespoke systems with these enterprise-grade tools. And administrators will be denoted with a red icon in the subsequent slide. Now, we've put all of these personas together because where Roman and I ended up with this talk is recognizing that just like we did at the ITSMF UK annual conference last November, there was a great opportunity to use Wardley mapping to show how different personas interact with technology that might be on different levels of maturity, and therefore how organizations need to think about what sort of service management practices they put in place. Now, this is not to say that, for example, incident management or quote unquote the service desk function only belongs in core infrastructure. In ITIL-4, for example, the service desk is a practice. It's a way of intaking work, and that way of intaking work, whether it be incidents, requests, changes, or any other sorts of work, can happen anywhere on this map. Now, we don't have time in the brief 30 minutes that we had to explain how a Wardley map is constructed and all the concepts behind it. I do believe ITSMF UK members have access to the recording of the session that Roman and I did last November. I highly encourage you to take a look at that, or just go to YouTube, search for Wardley map, and you'll see lots of talks by Simon Wardley where he introduces the concept of his map. But putting that aside, what we tried to do was to construct a Wardley map of how these different personas have relationships with different sorts of technologies, and those technologies themselves might be very nascent, very fast changing, all the way through to sort of commodity or utilities that are being rented, such as core infrastructure or cloud computing, and so on and so forth. Maps are not meant to be perfect. They're meant to be conversation starters. So you may disagree with where we've put some of our bubbles. Like somebody might say, well, you know, the research platform is not a product, it's custom built. Or, you know, the LMS is not a product, it's a commodity. Whatever it might be, I'm sure there are valid challenges to how we've constructed the map. So it's meant more for a point of view. We put this together more for a discussion, a starting point for a discussion, in the subsequent slides, rather than as a definitive output of comprehensive research. So with that, Roman, I'll pass it on to you. And how can we use this Wardley map to understand what service management can bring to the table?
Well, remember, if you still remember the beginning, we started with a reference to an ancient best management practice guide called FITS. And just like ITIL-2 those days, the focus of the recommendations of the service management guide in late 90s and early 2000s was on efficiency, on repeatable processes, on eliminating our deviations, and generally it was designed for predictability, it was designed for efficiency, it was designed for standard processes. And in the list of the benefits for FITS and I believe for earlier versions of ITIL as well, we find this repeatable quality. And that works really well, except it doesn't work always. It works really well for well-known situations, for low complexity. And where do we find those known situations and low complexity? Sorry. We find it in well-established, commoditized, and well-known technology, where everything is known, everything or most things are known, most things are standardized, most things are commoditized, many things are outsourced, but still we look for predictable quality and low variations in the activities. And all the versions of service management guidance, whether it is ITIL or the second version or FITS, which was based on it, or any other best practice that was developed at the beginning or very beginning of the century, they are mostly suitable for let's say, standard actions with standard products and services. The problem is that many things, as we see on the map, are not falling in that bucket. Many things are not standard, many things are not commoditized, and many things are in different stages. Many systems are at different stages of the technology evolution. And they could be addressed better with later versions of service management. So if you look at what version 3 was focused on, if we discuss it in ITIL terms, and sorry, I'm biased, so I will be discussing it in ITIL terms, then we will find version 3 more suitable for let's say, less stable, less known services and situations. If you look at version 2 and version 3 of ITIL, and you will try applying that to custom-built products and to products that are still in development or heavily tailored, then you will find that recommendations of version 3 are generally more suitable for that sort of technology and for that sort of relationship between service provider, service consumer, and various service consumers' roles, whether it's customers or users. And finally, when we were putting together ITIL 4 5 years ago, we were really trying to address the needs of emerging technologies and of people working with emerging technologies. So our aim was to cater in every practice description. If you think, for instance, of, I don't know, change enablement, then if you open change enablement practice in version 4, then you will see that there is a complexity-based approach to categorization of changes. There is a complexity-based approach to management of changes. And whether you will go for standardized and predictable ways of dealing with changes on the right-hand side on this map, or to more experimental and safe-to-fail experimentations, for instance, or other approaches to test and implement changes for the left-hand side of this map, all this is described now in ITIL 4. So among many objectives that we had when we were putting together ITIL 4, we really aimed to address this growing complexity and a growing number of innovative and custom-built products and services compared to the previous focus on predictability, on reliability, on repeatability, and on efficiency. Because contrary to popular belief, efficiency and agility are not always coming together, and sometimes you have to choose. You cannot be agile if you really try being efficient. You have to have some slack of capacity. You have to have some freedom to experiment, and to fail, and to produce some necessary waste on the way. So we are trying to address it all. If we move ITIL from the focus and we just try to generalize these approaches, then we can summarize some recommendations and some trends in management for different areas of this space as follows. So for some of the systems, we will be and for our emerging systems where we use agile methods and we create something in-house, so some things that are more applicable to research environment than, for instance, to administration environment, then we will be focusing on reducing costs of changes and increasing probably the pace of changes, the speed of the implementation. And we will be looking at various agile methods and various methodologies, techniques, frameworks such as DevOps, and trying to adopt them to address the need for speed. If we look at another perspective here, which is learning and reducing waste, so optimization of the workflows and reduction of waste, then on the left-hand side, we cannot, as I just said, we cannot expect high efficiency and lowest waste, and we normally don't even expect it, because we are ready to spend some time and other resources experimenting and finding the best solution. And on the left-hand side of this diagram, we will be necessary producing some some waste, we will be spending efforts and we will be spending time on activities that will not directly lead us to the results, in order to define which activities are the best and what can be are adopted and what can be eventually standardized, and we will have then stronger focus on waste and resource optimization. And finally, if we look at our reducing deviations, that's the things that I started with, and that used to be the primary focus of the good management practice sources, then we will find that on the right-hand side, this focus is stronger. On the left-hand side, this focus is weaker, and we just cannot apply best practice, which was developed 20 years ago, to the environment on the left-hand side, to the VUCA environment, to the environment where things are purposefully and are constantly changing. So if we again apply these scales, these dimensions to our university technology and our personas landscape, then we will see that those responsible for management of technology in the units, they have to adopt multiple frameworks. They cannot limit their let's say, good practice guidance to just one source, and they certainly cannot limit it to one source published 20 years ago. So they have to stay up to date. They have to stay aware of not only the technology development, but also technology management development. And to the MEBIS, Akshay.
No, I was just going to say, before you move to this next slide, could we just stay on that slide?
Absolutely.
Part of the reason why we chose to include this slide is to talk about, and I see it came up in the chat question, a comment from Andrew about whether technology has moved from left to right, but ITSM has maybe moved from right to left. There's some truth in that, for sure. All technology moves along the commodity curve, right? At different speeds, perhaps. So, back in the day, televisions used to be small black and white screens in like big wooden cabinets. Now you've got huge panels, which for the sort of buying power comparison are relatively cheap. But the commodification of television then grew rise to, let's say, TV Guide and other publications that highlighted what you could watch on television. And as those sorts of articles became commodity, I mean, think of how many listicles we have talking about how this show, 10 things that you should be, reasons why you should be watching the show, et cetera, et cetera. We see the emergence of other products, services, et cetera, that are built on top of what has now become commodity. And if you watch some of the videos about world mapping, it talks about how organizations can deliberately create strategies to prevent competitors from commodifying products, or in order to retain competitive differentiation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the other point about ITSM has gone from the right to the left. I wouldn't necessarily say that ITSM itself has gone from the right to the left, from commodity to genesis. I think that there's a greater appreciation and recognition for the need to distribute ITSM practices across the entire commodity curve. So, for example, you could have incident management, and this is where this is a great segue and plug for the concept of practices, as we talked about it in ITIL-4. Practices are organizational capabilities. They're not necessarily a singular way of doing something. So a practice for incident management is the organization's ability to manage incidents and manage different sorts of incidents, which might need different tools, different processes and procedures, different skills, different risk-taking appetites, et cetera, et cetera. So the way in which you manage incidents to core infrastructure would be different for the way you manage incidents to research code that is being held in a code repository. Both approaches are equally valid. And one of the things that I think we've all heard over time, which right now just makes me want to roll my eyes, is we must standardize the way in which we do something. Standardization can often be a seductive trap that you can very easily fall into and force maybe developers to work in a non-conformant, in in a way that doesn't conform to what they're trying to do. So service management needs to be distributed, and that brings me to the next slide, which is you can take a, if you develop a map of your own, you can then take a look at where it makes sense to collect the way in which a service management practice needs to be managed. So there is no singular centralization, there's instead federation of these ITSM practices. So you could say, well, everything in the commodity sector and maybe a couple of these things in the product category can be centralized because they have common ways of working. We can achieve higher degrees of standardization. We're more focused on reducing the cost of deviation, etc. Whereas the way in which we want to manage back office systems, the way we want to manage classroom technology, etc., those sorts of procedures, those sorts of risk appetites, or those sorts of skills are different. And so it makes sense to centralize the IT service management related to those systems in a separate team or organization. So you can use this to drive your, not just your operating model, but your organizational model. And I think Roman's version seems to have missed the last outro slide that we had, but that's where we kind of stopped. Oh, he does have the outro slide. Brilliant.
Just has been recovered. Yes, I'd also noticed that it tried escaping us, but no, it didn't manage to do that. That basically was all we had time for. So we just wanted to highlight a few key takeaways that you can take and carry away. So first of all, there is a number of skill gaps, and they need to be taken into consideration. And it's not only the skill gap between the students and the institution, it's more multifaceted, and sometimes it's the students who are more proficient in technology, sometimes it's the university, and it's not a matter of lower, higher, it's just different spaces sometimes. Then we need to identify the roles of people who use technology, who are our consumers, and people who manage technology. And of course, and it was mentioned in the chat, these roles are combined. Some researchers are also instructors, and some students become instructors as well. And some students are administrators while they are there, and many students are researchers. So, of course, these personas are simplified, and of course, you can take more than one and combine them in one person. So, as any generalization, it's partially correct. Use relevant management tools for each type of technology, because once you understand where your technology is on the adoption curve and the evolution curve, you can think of the relevant management tools. And there is no single source of good practice which is universal and applies to all situations. So you have to develop, as someone responsible for technology in higher education, you or whoever is responsible, they have to develop a universal service management system that would address the needs of all key roles and all technology used, which probably will span across the whole space on that worldly map that we used. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it will trigger some discussions during the further presentations and for the following roundtable discussion. And thank you very much. And Akshay, thank you. It's as usual, it's a pleasure to do these things together.
Same here.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you, Akshay.